Number 10. Magneto vs. Uranos. During an X-Men Red tie-in issue for the AXE Judgment Day event, in a fight that lasted barely a page and a half, Uranos completely destroys Magneto. And I mean destroys him. And never mind Magneto, although that brief battle is something to behold, Uranos completely wrecks most of planet Arakko too. Well, him and his army, but still. While Magneto would later on get some sweet revenge on Uranos, in the first fight the two have, Uranos manages to wrench Magneto's heart from his body, seemingly killing him, which was very shocking at the time. However, we later learn that Magneto manages to stay alive to fight another day by controlling the metal in his blood, controlling its flow throughout his body. So even without a heart, his blood can move and he can stay alive. Also, for those of you claiming that Magneto shouldn't count on this list because he's a villain, I'd say that lately Magneto's actually been pretty heroic, so it's safe to count him here, at least from my perspective. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you need to read some comics, because there's some really good X-Men books happening right now. You are missing out, like X-Men Red. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and you are like, oh my gosh, I wish they did this with like anime and manga, guess what? We do! And you can check it out over at Most Amazing Top 10 Anime. Number 9. Aquaman vs. the Death Kraken. I mean, this is definitely a one-sided fight, because in the end, Arthur has no chance but to basically give up. Or, well, I guess not give up per se, but to potentially sacrifice himself to defeat the enemy. Which makes it sound a lot more balanced than it is, but trust me, it's not that balanced of a fight. The Death Kraken is basically a giant cosmic kraken known as a space kraken. These beings roam the cosmos, devouring parts of, or in some cases, entire worlds. Kinda like Galactus, but more terrifying to behold because, you know, they're krakens. The Death Kraken has an intense hunger for death, and so it wants to actually devour worlds, whereas its twin, the Flood, hungers for oceans. In order to defeat the Death Kraken, Arthur realized that he had no other choice but to enter the Kraken, allowing it to basically consume him whole, as he had the life force within him, the opposite of the death energy that the Death Kraken was sustained by. So he was like, that should cancel the other one out and I should be able to defeat it. Aquaman successfully did defeat the creature, but it is implied that it cost him his life to do so. And I mean, I can't see any other way that would have gone. I mean, look at that thing. The Death Kraken is massive and it's horrifying. It's gigantic. I mean, that feels just like a very uneven fight, just seeing those two beings together. Number 8. Batman vs. Wonder Woman. It just goes to show you that although Batman is super skilled, prepared, strong of body, mind, and will, it isn't enough to rival the might that is Wonder Woman. In Wonder Woman, the Hecate, Batman attempts to apprehend a woman wanted for murder, but is blocked from doing so by Wonder Woman, who is tied and bound to that woman, Danielle Wellies, who is called on the right of Hecate. Performing the ritual correctly means that Danielle has Diana's protection, in exchange for her servitude to Diana. However, not only does Batman fail to beat Wonder Woman in combat to get Danielle from her, but he also fails when he tries to also use the same ritual to get Wonder Woman's protection. Yikes! That's a pretty bad defeat right there. He's sort of like, alright, maybe I can do the thing, and she's like, you can't do it. You kinda suck at it, Batman, but so nah. Number 7. Emma Frost vs. Professor X. A lot of people think of Professor X as one of the strongest telepaths in the world, and he is, but he's not the only one. And although Emma Frost generally takes second place to the likes of her rival, colleague, and frenemy, Jean Grey, she can actually hold her own against Charles, as it turns out, especially when she's smart enough to bait him into a trap, which, you know, Emma, she's a very smart gal. This so happens when Charles attempts to take control of Cyclops' mind to see if there's anything of Nathaniel Essex, Mr. Sinister, left in there. At least that's what he claims anyways. Emma sets a trap in Scott's mind, with his permission of course, and when Charles attempts to probe further, he basically sets off that trap, unleashing Emma. Emma is then able to take full control, having been biding her time wisely by setting up blocks and failsafes so that she can basically call the shots and take over Charles's mind, as she attempts to search Xavier's mind for the same thing, any trace of Sinister, and also torment him somewhat while doing so, as Emma says to Charles, at the risk of sounding vulgar, I own you, which, yeah, she kinda did there for a second. Number 6. War Thor vs. Mangog. Mangog in general is just completely nuts when it comes to his power levels. There are less that are actually able to stand up against him in comparison to the number that he's decimated at one point or another in the comics. I mean, yeah, only a few people can do that. But one of the heroes who got it the worst was probably War Thor. War Thor ended up being confronted by Mangog and being classified as a god, and he was absolutely decimated by him as a result. Issue number 7 701 of Mighty Thor showcases a brutal fight between the two when Mangog comes looking for the rest of the Asgardians and only finds War Thor. He even manages to completely destroy War Thor's hammer, which is super sad. Also then, of course, War Thor gets destroyed because no hammer, no War Thor. Number 5, Professor X versus Cyclops. I mean, this fight could easily be very one-sided, possibly going either way depending on who was writing and depending on where these characters were. But this one was really one-sided because it ended in death. Charles's death. Professor X died in the raging fire of Scott Summers' Phoenix. During Avengers vs. X-Men, Cyclops became one of the chosen Phoenix Five after Iron Man, while attempting to destroy the Phoenix Force, split it into 5 instead. Cyclops becomes the last of the 5 left with the power though, and it becomes too much for him, corrupting him. Professor X, at this time a pretty hated dude, his revelations of all the awful stuff that he'd done in the past had come to light in recent years, attempts to talk his star pupil down. But Cyclops is not gonna hear it. Pissed at Xavier, and rightfully so to be honest, although this may have not been the best timing for him to do this, Psyche refuses to give in to Charles's control and simply straight up kills him in response. As he could do because he has the Phoenix Force. So I mean, I guess Charles was like, I can win this. I got like emotional things I can use. No, didn't work. Phoenix says no. Number 4, the Fallen One versus King Thanos. This fight is literally described as one-sided in the comic it appears in itself. This one comes to us from the alternate reality where Thanos wins in issue number 17 of the 2016 Thanos series. With this arc in the series, Thanos wins, being by Donny Cates. Thank you, Mr. Cates, for giving us Cosmic Ghost Rider in this one. So awesome. Here we see the Fallen One, who is now shiny Onyx, formerly Silver Surfer, deemed worthy enough to wield Mjolnir. He fights against King Thanos, who has killed almost all life in the cosmos. The Fallen One attempts to make him pay and initially has the upper hand, but in the end is beaten back, impaled, and torn asunder before being pulverized. And he also loses his buddy Hulk, so it's really sad. Number 3, Batman versus the Joker. Not just any Joker either. For this point, we are talking about Emperor Joker. This is an extremely powerful version of the Joker who gets 99.99 of Mr. Mixie's Piddlix power after tricking him out of it. Mr. Mixie was going to give Joker 1%, but he got swindled by the jokester because, of course he did. The Joker uses his newfound power to do a bunch of nasty things, but one of which is basically tormenting Batman on a daily basis before killing him each and every day, only to resurrect him the next day, bringing him back so he can do it all over again. The defeat is actually so traumatic for Batman that eventually, when Superman does find a way to beat the Joker, restoring the world to normal, Superman is actually forced to take Batman's memories of the daily torment from his mind. Otherwise, Batman would have been unable to operate as a hero or really a person, as that entire experience broke him. Also, you know something's bad when it breaks Batman. He's a pretty unbreakable guy normally. Number 2, Green Lantern versus Batman and Robin. What can I say about this one? Well, it comes from Frank Miller's All-Star Batman and Robin, The Boy Wonder, so I think you can imagine how it goes. Yeah, All-Star Batman and Robin is an experience, to say the least. In issue number 9, Green Lantern comes by to try and tell Batman he's taken things too far, warning him that he's putting people in danger, and basically imploring him to just stop being such a crazy jerk. Seemingly, Hal's house call is triggered specifically by the fact that he is accusing Batman of kidnapping Dick Grayson, who he does not know but suspects is Batman's new sidekick, Robin. Despite Batman trying to deny this, even though, like, Hal's not dumb Batman. He can put the pieces together. Batman evidently does not want to hear it, and he's been preparing for Hal's arrival, as we can see from the beginning of this issue. He and Robin paint an entire safe house of his yellow so that he could super easily kick Hal's butt in it when he invites him there to, I guess, meet. Yeah, because yellow is the color of fear on the emotional spectrum, and so therefore it is Hal's weakness. So yeah, defeated with lemonade. I don't know. Number 1, Green Lantern versus Batman. A lot of times Batman gets the final say in these Green Lantern fights. For this point, we are not talking about Hal Jordan though, but instead everyone's favorite Lantern. Well, at least some people's favorite Lantern anyways. Guy Gardner. Guy Gardner is a Green Lantern who's been known to get on his teammates' nerves. At times, his cockiness is a little too much for his fellow heroes, which may have been the case when Batman referred to him as a mongrel. But of course, Guy did not take such an insult in stride. In response to this, he challenges Batman to a fight he is sure to lose, unfortunately. Batman accepts the challenge and knocks him out in one punch. which comes back a few different times in the comics. It's a pretty memeable and hilarious moment, to be honest. It's important to keep in mind that Guy, isn't using his ring in this fight, although he didn't get much of a chance to, even if he wanted to do that. As Mr. Miracle says, "I'll say this for Batman, he's efficient." Just one punches Guy Gardner, oh boy. Number 10, Iron Man vs. Squirrel Girl. I love how even during Doreen Green's very first appearance, she earned her title of being unbeatable. The very first time we meet Squirrel Girl, she's attempting to impress Iron Man in the hopes of earning a place at his side as his sidekick. The crazy part is she successfully ambushed him too. During a test flight for his new collision avoidance radar, that's really what he calls it, Doreen jumps onto his flying suit of armor, with him inside. Unable to see except through digital readouts that appear on a visor he's wearing, he is successfully surprised and thrown off course. When Iron Man attempts to remove his visor, Doreen uses her tail to block his vision still. In the end, they both crash to the ground, and Doreen introduces herself as Squirrel Girl, explaining that she simply wanted to prove herself to him in order to earn a place as his pard, short for partner. Sadly, he turns her down, even though she did prove that she's pretty awesome, I think, in that issue. And friends, before I move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, please head on down, give this video a thumbs up, also to let us know that you want to hear about some more one-sided fights. Number 9, Trinity vs. Harley Quinn. In one of what can only be described as one of the most wild fights ever that seems to be more about clout than powers or ability, Harley Quinn managed to defeat not one, not two, but all three heroes that we consider as belonging to DC's Holy Trinity. We're talking about Batman, Wonder Woman, and of course, Superman. When did this go down? During Heroes in Crisis. And how did Harley do it? By playing on the weaknesses of the heroes she was up against, and also utilizing Batman's utility belt, of course, which in and of itself generally is equipped with items needed to take down Bat's colleagues, because that's just how Batman rolls. It's like, I always got kryptonite on me though, just in case, you never know. Number 8, Jubilee vs. Wolverine. Sometimes heroes get slapped by other heroes. Slapped. Such a great onomatopoeia. In the case of Jubilee, this is what happened when Wolverine came face to face with her. Of course, this wasn't just normal Jubes, this was Jubes under the influence of the Shadow King. She was possessed by him, in fact. Initially, Wolverine baited her in by promising that he wouldn't hurt her. Wolverine says, in fact, "I ain't gonna fight you, Jube. I couldn't." But it turns out that that's a lie. Although he doesn't badly injure Jubilee, knowing she is not in control of herself at this moment, he does knock her out with a slap. A slapped, if you will. Of course, this wasn't a direct fight between the two heroes, as Wolverine was only doing this to protect others from Jubilee, and likely also to protect Jubilee from herself at this moment in time. Number 7, Shazam vs. Superman. Shazam vs. Superman is a fight that everyone is always eager to know about when it comes to who ends up on top, who will win. They're so similar, but so different. Multiple times, the person who has won has actually been Superman though, despite his weakness to magic, specifically Shazam, or as he was once known, Captain Marvel's magic lightning. Despite this, Superman has before used Shazam's own lightning against him though, putting him in the way of it and thereby transforming Shazam back into his kid form of human boy Billy Batson, proving that sometimes it's not necessarily about power, but instead all you need is the right technique or course of action to turn a fight. I think that's personally why I would always feel like Superman would usually win that fight, because I feel like Superman, he's just got the know-how a little bit more than Shazam does. Experience, experience. Number 6, Gambit vs. Wolverine. Although this might not be as satisfying for our editors here at Top 10 Nerd, sorry editors, this one comes to us from the Wolverine podcast series, really in essence a serial radio play, so not a lot of images, but there's lots of images of Wolverine and Gambit that exist, so hey. For this one, I am talking about Wolverine the Lost Trail. By the way, if you haven't listened to either The Long Night or Lost Trail, I highly recommend both. They are both very well cast, produced, and with a great story. And if you ever wanted to picture Richard Armitage as Logan, you can do so here, as it's his voice you're going to be hearing in this role. In the episode Greenhaven is Everywhere, the penultimate episode for this story, Logan frees himself from Jason Wyngarde's control, only to face a still mind-manipulated Gambit. While Gambit attempts to convince Logan with the words that joining Wyngarde's Greenhaven is the right thing for him to do, Logan, of course, refuses to hear it. He's not about the mind control right now, he's not feeling it. As a result, Gambit pulls out his cards and tensions begin to rise. The two actually circle each other, which you can hear reflected in the audio dialogue if you happen to be listening with headphones on. And in the end, when Logan decides the only way out of this is to take out Gambit, Remy goes for his bow staff. He's like, I don't even need my cards, I just need my bow staff. Not true in this case. Logan quickly cuts his staff in half. Gambit then asks Logan if he'll be cut in half next, to which Logan responds, nope, if I can't get through to you with words, pausing to punch him in the face before adding, fist to the face should do it. Which it did, so true. Number 5. The Justice League versus Perpetua. Sometimes when it comes to one-sided fights, it's about heroes smacking down other heroes, or heroes smacking down villains. But in this case, it's about a whole team of heroes who got destroyed by a single villain. Though to be fair, this villain is also kind of like woven into the fabric of reality, as it is understood not just in the DC universe, but beyond that, into the DC multiverse, and even kinda beyond that. During the events of Death Metal, Wonder Woman faces off with Perpetua earlier on, and could have stopped her, but when Perpetua first explains the true nature of anti-crisis energy, which Wonder Woman needs to use to defeat Perpetua's crisis energy, Wonder Woman is hesitant to use the anti-crisis. During her hesitancy, Perpetua and Batman Who Laughs destroy reality, rebuilding it with crisis energy in Perpetua's image, unleashing the dark multiverse, with Batman Who Laughs later in turn betraying Perpetua. Justice League loses, with Batman, Wonder Woman, and Supes all being given a new horrible place in this dark world. While this loss is shocking and intense, later Diana does become willing to unleash the anti-crisis energy after understanding the cost of it and deciding that although it's a pretty scary change, it's still better than, you know, Perpetua's and Batman Who Laughs' way. So it's a temporary loss, but still it was quite a dramatic one, and we got a lot of cool alternate versions of characters, so yay! Number 4. Doctor Doom vs. Squirrel Girl. In the same issue that Squirrel Girl handily defeated Iron Man, although he remained unimpressed with her, Squirrel Girl also takes on master villain Doctor Doom and once more proves her mettle as an unbeatable superhero. Here it was Squirrel Girl's ability to communicate with squirrels that allowed her to defeat Doom, causing him to abandon his own ship. I kid you not. I also love how Doom, I feel like, still sees this as a victory in his mind. Also, I bet Doom would say this was a Doombot. I don't know if this has been retconned to a Doombot yet, but I could see Doom saying that. Basically, Dorian Green has been an unstoppable force since day one, as Marvel Superheroes number 8 from the 1990s is actually her first appearance, if you can believe that. Number 3. Batman vs. Bane. Probably one of the most famous fights in comic book history. In this fight, Batman is brutalized by Bane. Bane ends up escaping Arkham and decides to see, you know, how much havoc he can cause. When Batman ends up overwhelmed by the hordes of recently escaped criminals swarming the streets, Bane takes this as an opportunity to strike. Run down and exhausted after a night of non-stop fighting at this point, Batman is easily defeated by the villain, who famously breaks Batman's back over his knee, which, you know, we have that awesome page of, that awesome cover. Ouch. Bruce Wayne's Batman would return from this, but it would take him some time to heal. As you know, does happen if you break your back. Which you can heal from, it is possible, but it's not super easy to do. Number 2. Wolverine vs. Punisher. And maybe one of the most controversial of one-sided fights of all time, we see two heroes fight against one another, both who generally use less than heroic methods for getting things done. However, one of them still seems to be called a hero on the regular, that being Wolverine, while the other is often relegated to a different category, that of anti-hero, that being Punisher. It's kinda interesting. The two originally were kind of working toward the same goal here, but when they both differ on the method of like how to deal with the situation, Wolverine ends up getting pretty humiliated in the ensuing fight, with Punisher even at one point steamrolling Logan. And that's after he does a whole bunch of other awful things to him, some of which I can't even say. That's how bad they are. Number 1. Joker vs. Superman. Can we even call this one a fight? It's kinda just like straight up murder, really. Although maybe rightfully executed murder? I don't know. I don't think murder's ever really right. I guess it also depends on which side of this conflict you feel you're on, though I think by the end of Injustice, pretty much all of us are on Batman's side, right? No? Yes? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But back to the fight at hand. This one obviously went down in the alternate reality of Injustice. Here, Joker and Harley Quinn end up manipulating Superman into killing Lois by making him think he's fighting Doomsday. In doing so, they not only have killed Lois, but also her and Superman's future offspring, and all of Metropolis gets blown up too as well. Unsurprisingly, Superman does not take this very well, and when they get Joker in an interrogation room, Superman ends up cracking under the pressure of Joker's unrelenting grin, killing the Joker in cold blood. Because that's what would probably also happen if the Joker came up against Superman. Well, just saying, if Superman wanted to at any time, he could just pretty much end that.
Number 10. Magneto versus Red Skull. Magneto and the Red Skull are on opposite sides of history. Magneto grew up in a Jewish family living in Germany during World War II, and we all know Red Skull and Hydra's stance in World War II Germany, so it's safe to say that these two villains would almost never get along, right? In Acts of Vengeance from 1989, Magneto and Red Skull were actually temporarily united, but it's really important to note that Magneto was unsure whether this was the Red Skull that aided Germany in the slaughter of his people. So Magneto confronted him, and Red Skull confirmed that he was indeed the original. It didn't take much for Magneto, the master of magnetism, to overpower the Skull, but unlike what you might think, Magneto does not take his life. Instead, Magneto leaves the Skull isolated in a stripped down fallout shelter 20 feet underground. He removed the ladder from the escape hatch, gave him 10 gallons of water, took out his homing transmitters, gave him no food and no light, just water, air, and his own depraved thoughts. Number 9. God King Doom versus Thanos. 2015's Secret Wars has Dr. Doom receiving the power of the Beyonders at the conclusion of Time Runs Out. The Latvian dictator is able to save reality from complete destruction at the hands of the Beyonders, stealing their power and merging all reality into a place called Battleworld, which he rules over as God Emperor. A few characters show up on Battleworld with their full memories intact, and they try to stop Doom and put things back to normal. One of them would be Thanos. Thanos, being the smug mad titan he is, decides to challenge Doom and refuses all of Doom's offers to work with him. So in one quick movement, Doom plunges his hand into Thanos' chest, grabs a hold of his spine, and turns his body to ash, leaving one of the most amazing comic panels ever. Number 8. Joker versus Alexander Luthor Jr. The Joker has a special something that just no other villain can really stand up to. What is it? Popularity. People love the Joker. This magic word, popularity, allows the Joker to beat out other villains that in the real world he would never be able to take down. It also allows him to save the day on occasion. In 2005's Infinite Crisis, Earth 3's Alexander Luthor Jr. attempts to remake the multiverse into one perfect reality. Perfect for him at least. By the end, well, he fails, but he finds himself cornered by Lex Luthor and Joker of New Earth, which is the mainstream continuity. Joker pretty ruthlessly scars Luthor Jr. with acid and then brings his life to a sudden end with a bang. And it was all because Alexander didn't include him in his scheme in the first place. Number 7. Joker versus Simon. Yes, it is the Joker again, and guess what? He will appear later on as well. But I also hear you asking, Adam, who the heck is Simon? Exactly. That's my point. You think that the infamous Joker is going to fall to a guy named Simon, who most people haven't even heard of? Simon is a villain of the Teen Titans who has vast telekinesis and telepathic powers, and he is also the leader of the Fearsome Five. But in Salvation Run number 2, he is a member of the new Injustice League when a bunch of villains get exiled to an alien world. He attempts to convince his fellow supervillains that escape is impossible, and then proceeds to lay down plans for beginning a new civilization, only to be very abruptly interrupted by the Joker, who runs up and smashes Simon's brain in with a rock repeatedly. Like I said, it was very abrupt. Number 6. General Zod versus Captain Boomerang. Never put a captain up against a general. It will not go well. In 2016's Suicide Squad, in literally the second issue, Task Force X are sent on a mission to Russia to retrieve or destroy an unknown device. Turns out that device is actually a portal to the Phantom Zone. Rather than leave it be, Captain Boomerang approaches the portal and is literally incinerated down to his ankles instantly by none other than General Zod, who was trapped inside only to break free. I doubt the Boomerang guy would have been able to help much in the squad's fight against Zod. Honestly, it's a miracle any of them actually survived at all. Number 5. Venom versus Sandman. In Peter Parker's Spider-Man Volume 1, number 16, Sandman took to reforming the Sinister Six to go after Spider-Man. Now one of those six was Eddie Brock, aka Venom. Being the villain he once was, Venom betrayed Sandman and the two got into a fight. Things quickly take a turn for the violent and chompy as Brock/Venom takes a huge chunk out of Sandman's body, causing Sandy to destabilize and break down, unable to stop himself from dissipating into a nearby storm drain. It's a pretty awful and pretty quick dispatching. Sandman does eventually return, but not as his old self, as the years spent in a kind of ghostly form left him in kind of tatters. Damn Venom. Number 4, Kite Man versus Riddler's army. Okay, I am a sucker for an underdog. In Batman Volume 3, there was the war of jokes and riddles between the Joker and the Riddler, surprisingly, each fueled by their desire to take Batman's life. Now, each of these lunatics had gathered up a group of villains to their side, and they caused a hell of a lot of damage to Gotham and its people in their war. One person caught in the crossfire would be Charles Brown. Charles became a mole for Batman in Joker's army, and when Riddler found out, he brought Charles's son to an end. Charles became Kite Man and joined up with the Joker to get revenge. With Batman's help, Riddler takes down Joker's army one by one, leaving only Kite Man, who is forced to switch sides. In the final climactic battle though, Kite Man helps Batman and Riddler's army infiltrate the Joker's holdout, and when the battle is won and the villains turn on Batman, Kite Man had a backup plan that allowed him to almost single-handedly incapacitate 8 of the biggest bads on Batman's rogues gallery, helping Batman save the day. Never underestimate Kite Man. Hell yeah. Number 3, Batman Who Laughs versus Perpetua. Remember how I said Joker would be showing up again? Well, I kinda half lied. It's actually a Jokerized Batman, which is taking 2 of the arguably most popular DC hero and villain combos and mashing them together. Who can stand in the way of that? Also, to call this fight one-sided is a little debatable, but the Batman Who Laughs rose from being just a man to becoming a multiversal level threat very quickly after he gained access to the powers of Dr. Manhattan. This level of power allowed him to face and defeat Perpetua, one of, if not the, most powerful god in DC Comics, who is mother of the multiverse. He became the nightmare of one of the most powerful beings in all of DC Comics, sealing her away within fragments of the Source Wall. Number 2, Thanos versus Loki. Taking a break from comic books for a moment here, let's journey to the MCU. Loki is one of those characters who has elevated himself beyond the status of villain into a bit more of an anti-hero role, and the popularity of Tom Hiddleston's portrayal of the character is likely somewhat to blame for that. But popularity is not saving this character. In the opening of Avengers Infinity War, Thanos attacks the remaining Asgardians after the events of Ragnarok. Though they are Asgardians, he does seem to lay waste to them pretty easily. With Loki feigning allegiance to the Mad Titan, he makes a move against Grimace with a dagger only to be stopped, disarmed, and choked to death without the big bad even seeming to break a sweat, truly solidifying just how much of a threat Thanos is going to be. And in at number 1 is Thrag versus Dinosaurus. The Viltrumites from the Invincible comic series are a race of near invulnerable, incredibly strong, world-conquering aliens, but none among them stands as strong, as invulnerable as Grand Regent Thrag. Battle-hardened over thousands of years, only the most powerful characters can even hope to stand one-on-one against this powerhouse. David Anders, the villain known as Dinosaurus, is not one of those characters. While Dinosaurus is very strong, it's more his intelligence that is his greatest weapon. Dinosaurus allied himself with Invincible around issue 90 of the comics, and he would see Thrag attempt to take down Mark. Dinosaurus attacks Thrag, but his claws break on Thrag's skin. Thrag pummels the Dino Man, but he stops, distracted by an explosion, giving Dinosaurus the chance to chomp on his head, only for him to completely shatter his teeth, giving Thrag the chance to mock him and then break his jaw and leave him for dead. Luckily, Dinosaurus uses the opportunity to heal and escape with Mark.
Number 10, Patton Parnell versus Morlun. This one goes down pretty quickly in the comics, but we also get a lot of time to get attached, or afraid more like, of Patton Parnell before he meets his end, at least. Patton Parnell is an alternate of Spider-Man, but he couldn't be introduced at a worse time in the comics, in terms of his own self-preservation. He is introduced at a time when Morlun and the Inheritors are running rampant across the multiverse, killing spider totems. As such, just when Parnell's story seems to be reaching its horrifying conclusion, with him becoming a spider-human monster hybrid and chasing after the girl of his dreams claims who he seems to now be inclined to possibly murder horribly, Moreland shows up. And he does what he does best, kill this spider totem, making Patton Parnell's story very short-lived. Which is good for his neighbor Sarah Jane in the moment, but unfortunate for us readers, as he was a super creepy villainous Spider-Man alternate, and personally, I loved him. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, please click that subscribe. Do it, do it, do it! Number 9. Joker vs. Red Skull. Oddly enough, despite being from two very different worlds, these two fought one another in the comic Batman and Captain America, a joint comic venture from both Marvel and DC, written by and with inks by John Byrne. While Batman and Captain America teamed up in the comics, also swapping sidekicks, so do their enemies, the Joker and Red Skull. However, when the Joker learns of Red Skull's bizarre patriotism and ideology, he swears to fight against him. On learning of the Skull's allegiance and Red Skull's offer for Joker to join him and his people, Joker responds by stating, "I may be a criminal lunatic, but I'm an American criminal lunatic." Despite his strong stance against the Red Skull and what he represents, however, Joker is pretty easily defeated here in this fight, being knocked out by one of Skull's goons before being dragged onto the plane to be taken back to Germany. Of course, they never do make it there, and Joker gets the last laugh in the end. Well, really the heroes get the last laugh in the end, but like many fights involving the standard Joker, this one against Red Skull is fairly one-sided. Number 8. Green Goblin vs. Sin Eater. I think the really cool thing about this fight is that in defeating Norman Osborn, Sin Eater also freed him. For Sin Eater, defeating a villain usually has to do with absolving them of their sin, which was exactly what happened here when Sin Eater finally caught up to Norman Osborn. Taking his gun, he fired and shot Norman directly, thereby removing his sin from him. Norman begged and pleaded to not be absolved because he claimed he wanted to beat his own demons by himself, but it turns out that this was likely not really Norman talking but the Green Goblin, who probably was just pleading to try and maintain his sense of evil. Number 7. Mephisto vs. Khonshu. While Mephisto doesn't end up as being permanently defeated, Khonshu with his avatar Moon Knight still manages to kill a hefty number of Mephistos. It turns out there are a bunch of different alternates, so Mephisto is able to just kinda like keep coming, but Khonshu with stolen powers of the Avengers and the help of Moon Knight ends up defeating 100 Mephistos in one day, which is wild. That's a lot of Mephistos. One is honestly a lot. And if you're wondering why Khonshu is being considered a villain here, it's because during this story arc, Age of Khonshu, he was actually kind of revealed to be one, acting in the name of justice but really taking over the world himself and then turning it into kind of like his own Egyptian underworld in the name of defeating Mephisto. Number 6. Dr. Doom vs. Morgan Le Fay. Doom is often one who believes he is more powerful than all, and in most cases, he's usually right, possessing a brilliant mind and extremely powerful will, and also being skilled in the use of magic. However, even with being a former student of Morgan Le Fay's, even his magic prowess is no match for her own. When Morgan learns that in the future her student and lover Victor will betray her, she decides to strike first. She travels through time to kill him, and although he attempts to stand against her, she very nearly succeeds in defeating him for good. But even though the Dark Avengers do come to stop her, the initial battle here is quick and painful for Doom before he ends up being rescued. Number 5. Killer Croc vs. Bane. Back in Batman issue 489, two heroes known for their strength and sometimes monstrous nature fought one another. And while they may have seemed more evenly matched on paper, one of them made quick work of the other. We are talking about the fight between Bane and Killer Croc, which happened in the pages of Batman back in the 1990s. While initially Killer Croc seems confident in this fight, things quickly turn south after Bane breaks his arm. From there, Bane continues to basically kick his butt and leaves him knocked out and bleeding amongst a pile of toys in the Eden Park Mall. The crazy thing was that Bane and Croc didn't even really fight because they had beef, but more because Bane wanted to face Batman. However, Bane leaves after discovering that the Batman he's come across here is not the true Batman, but John Paul Valley. Number 4. Ishmael Gregor vs. Black Adam. This one comes to us from the recent DC film released exclusively in theaters, Black Adam. The initial fight between these two characters is a fast and brutal one, thanks to Black Adam's rage. In this world, Black Adam is more pitched as an anti-hero, but in the comics, he has been known as a straight-up villain before. Although right now, I would say in the comics, he's also more of an anti-hero, so kinda makes sense. Still, even in the DCEU, this is a guy who has god-tier powers and who just straight up kills people who get in his way. In the case of Ishmael Gregor, he is the descendant of Black Adam's oldest enemy, the King of Kahndaq, who once oppressed his own people in search of greatness. When Ishmael seems to be trying to follow in his ancestors' footsteps and also kidnaps the son of Adriana Tomaz, Amon, both of whom are Teth Adam's allies, Black Adam loses it, emitting a powerful blast of electric energy that defeats Ishmael instantly. While this defeat is swift, it turns out that it's not permanent, however, as this may have been part of Ishmael's plan all along. This one comes from a super random place, but is a pretty intense fight between what are likely the two main baddies of the MCU thus far. In the comics Avengers Mech Strike issue number 4, Thanos is brought into this fight to face Kang, who the entire Avengers are basically up against. Unfortunately, despite Thanos' strength and brilliance, even he cannot defeat the Master of Time. All it takes is for Kang to lay his hands on Thanos and force him to experience the power Kang holds over time itself. He ages Thanos rapidly with his touch to the point that Thanos is no more than a skull, which is a creative way to kill him considering that Thanos was boasting of taking Kang's skull for his own trophy following their fight. Hahaha. Kang doesn't even plan to keep Thanos' skull either, tossing it on the ground and saying he doesn't need souvenirs to keep warm memories in his heart. It's kind of a weird thing to say when you kill someone, warm memories, but you know. The Avengers beat him back after this, but it's an impressive show of strength from Kang. Number 2, Joker vs. Poison Ivy. One of the most brutal fights in comics comes unsurprisingly from the world of Injustice, though more specifically we're talking about Injustice Year 0 issue number 8. Here Poison Ivy pays the Joker a visit to get revenge for the years of mistreatment towards his then ex, Harley Quinn. Ivy is inspired to do this after Harley reveals that she secretly had his daughter, and Ivy warns the Joker that if he ever hurts Harley again, she'll kill him. Despite the Joker threatening Ivy throughout this fight, it's very clear who has the real power between the two of them here. Number 1, Geist vs. Magneto. Geist vs. Magneto has to be one of my favorite all-time short-lived and brutal villain versus villain fights. Though really, between them, it's pretty apparent that Geist is the real villain here, I think. Magneto ends up doing his best to catch Geist and runs into him after he escapes punishment in Terra Verde in the late 80s Wolverine series. Magneto lures Geist out with a little mechanical toy and makes short work of him. While his fate isn't explicitly shown on panel, considering that Geist is a cyborg and Magneto is the master of magnetism, we can imagine how brutal this fight would be, and based on what we do see of what happens to the decoy robot toy, I think we know what's gonna happen there.
Coming in at number 10, we have Justice League War. Now, even though DC hasn't been able to get their footing when it comes to live action superhero movies, they definitely have made some amazing films in the animated world, and Justice League War is a reimagining of how the Justice League is formed in the fight against Darkseid. This movie starts without any of the heroes knowing each other, so they do that classic thing when a bunch of heroes end up in the same place and no one knows each other, they fight. Now in this fight, Superman really does own Batman. Everything that Batman tries to throw at him gets stuffed without even coming close to slowing Superman down. So why did I put it on this list? Well, the thing that brings the fight to the end is right before Superman is about to punch the Dark Knight into another dimension, Batman calls out Superman by his real name, Clark Kent, stopping him dead in his tracks. This is what makes Batman so incredible. In this rendition of the DC universe, he was the first person in the world to figure out who Superman was, and through his powerful intellect, he took complete control of the situation. He had that trump card in his pocket the whole fight. So one could argue that the entire time Batman looks like he's getting owned was just him studying Superman so he could learn how to fight him better. He could have called this out at any point. Also, there's a reason why I put this one at number 10. It's because he kind of does get beat up. Coming in at number 9 is Batman vs. Superman. Even though this movie was a massive stinky egg, it still had a Batman vs. Superman fight that ended with Clark Kent begging for his life and asking Batman to save his mom in the infamous Martha scene. I'm looking past how much this movie missed the mark to highlight the fact that Superman came into this fight very unprepared and Batman was the complete opposite. He had the kryptonite dust to turn Superman into basically a regular person, and he laid into him with some iron-plated right hooks. This all capped off with a kryptonite spear that left a nice slice wound in Superman's face. Imagine how this movie would have ended if their moms had different names. Coming in at number 8, we have New 52 Batman number 36. One of my favorite things in the DC universe is when Batman is forced to take on a group of heroes, especially when it's the Justice League. It's always interesting to see how the writers will create new ways for Batman to earn his keep amongst the gods. In this issue, members of the League have been turned into crazed Joker versions of themselves, and one by one they go toe-to-toe with Batman, each one of them unable to beat the Bat. Batman is able to pull this off through a giant mech suit that he's created just for this special occasion that has a specific tactic to beat each one of these heroes. Now, when Superman shows up, the mech suit reveals that it has microscopic red suns in the fists that will drain Soup's powers while he gets his head caved in. But the Man of Steel blasts past these fists, he pulls Bats from the mech and starts flying him into space. Right when it seems like there's no hope for our caped crusader, he spits a wad of kryptonite gum come into Superman's face, giving Bats the last minute victory. This one wasn't a destruction of Superman, but he had to fight the main members of the League beforehand, so I'm gonna give him this one. And the gun was such a cool Batman trick. Coming in at number 7, we have The Dark Knight Returns. This is probably the most iconic Batman vs Superman fight, mostly because it takes place in one of the greatest comic books of all time. In this, we have Superman in a very weakened state from stopping a nuke from crashing into the United States, and Batman is in the most old geezer state we have seen him outside of Batman Beyond. Batman really pulls out all the stops in this fight. He has the classic robotic batsuit that was stolen for that garbage fire movie Batman vs Superman. He has help from his newest Robin sidekick. He blasts Superman with an entire city worth of electricity, and he has Green Arrow hit Superman with a special kryptonite dust that took millions of dollars to make. This leaves Superman human, with Batman busting his face before he fakes his own death. Now, if we go back and watch this fight, yes, Superman is holding back the whole time, so it's hard to say Batman destroys him, but this had to be part of Batman's plan. He knew Clark would pull his punches against an old man and an old friend, thus leaving him vulnerable to the kryptonite dust attack. And in the end, Batman wasn't looking to kill Superman, he just wanted to send a message, which he definitely did. Coming in at number 6, we have Armageddon 2001. Let's mess around with timelines a little. Armageddon 2001 is an alternate future where Supes has gone rogue and starts killing off heroes left, right, and center, along with destroying any military defense in the world that might fight against him. This means that the president has one guy to turn to, and it's good old Batman. Batman again uses a super-powered suit, but this time he has kryptonite on hand from the get-go and really beats down Superman until he's literally green from kryptonite poisoning. Coming in at number 5, we have Injustice, an alternate universe fighting game where DC Universe characters throw down in matchups that don't make any sense, but it's still cool as hell. Yeah, sign me up. Not only are these games made by NetherRealm Studios, the same people who make the fantastic Mortal Kombat games, but the games actually have some of the best story modes in a fighting game ever. The game takes place in an alternate universe where Superman has gone rogue after Lois Lane is killed by the Joker. This causes him to become a tyrant, which eventually leads to a clash between him and Batman, where Batman whoops his butt and then locks him away in a Red Sun prison. Coming in at number 4, we have the Tower of Babel. Once again, breaking into the world of Batman, playing out how he would beat down every member of the League. In this wonderful comic, these contingency plans for taking out separate members of the League get into the wrong hands, and the plan to take out Superman is a secret new kryptonite that Batman has created. The crazy thing is about this new kryptonite, it doesn't make Superman weaker, it actually makes him stronger. This new kryptonite that Batman has cooked up makes Superman's skin translucent. This makes his ability to absorb solar energy increase to the point where Superman can no longer control his powers and becomes a threat to everyone around him. Eventually, this leads to Superman going into hiding. Now, this isn't a straight up fight, but Batman's plan worked flawlessly and he for sure destroyed Superman. Coming in at number 3, we have Superman Red Sun, a one-off comic that runs with the idea of what if Superman landed in the Soviet Union instead of America. This comic is amazing, and one of the best parts is when Russian Batman puts a beat down on Superman. He lures Superman into a trap that has him surrounded by red sun lights and then hits him with everything in the Krav Maga handbook. Superman actually almost dies in this fight, but then Wonder Woman swoops in to save the Blue Boy Scout from an early death, and then Batman actually commits suicide to avoid being caught. This would have probably been number 1 on the list if Batman didn't get help from Lex Luthor to pull off this plan. Coming in at number 2, we have The Dark Knight Strikes Again. This is the follow-up comic to the famous Dark Knight Returns, and I have to say, it's not as good, but it can be hard to follow up one of the best comics ever written. Well, in this comic, it has gone out that the Bat is back, and Superman goes to have a nice little chit-chat with him. Also, if you don't know, in this universe, Batman, along with a lot of the other heroes, are very old, and Superman and Batman aren't anywhere close to friends anymore. So when Superman shows up at the Batcave, Batman unloads a wagon of whooping on him. He has a series of devices set up in the cave that are just there to take down Superman. Flash and Green Arrow are both there to give Batman a helping hand at putting Superman down, and this is all topped off with one of the coolest Superman beating tools ever, kryptonite gauntlets. This entire fight leaves Superman a bloody mess. And coming in at the number 1 spot is Injustice 2. So basically the same stuff is going on as Injustice 1, but this time we have even more heroes and villains, and Brainiac gets involved. Now, I will say that there are 2 endings to this game. One of them has Superman win and merge with Brainiac to become one of the most powerful beings in the universe, and he makes Batman his slave. But I put this as number 1 because if you make the choice to have Batman win, then Superman is depowered and Batman leaves him locked away in the Phantom Zone with no powers. Pretty much the biggest way you can destroy Superman. Alright everyone, that has been our list, and as promised, I'm going to give you guys my picks for my favorite non-DC, non-Marvel superhero games. First, I gotta pick Infamous, a series of games that has you running around as a superpowered 20-something with the weight of the world on your shoulders, and it is some of the best superhero gameplay that I have ever seen. The effects that your good and evil choices have on the world is extremely interesting, and in the most recent edition you get to explore some interesting new powers like concrete and neon. After that, I have Saints Row 4. There was a time when Saints Row was just a Grand Theft Auto clone, but after the third game, the franchise really took a turn for the strange and in the best way. In the fourth game, you can explore a vast array of new powers and strange weapons, and there's even an expansion where you get to fight your way out of hell. And my final pick is Crackdown. Now, the first one of this 3-game series is my favorite, but really all of them are just dumb fun. The best part is you start off as this kind of scrawny super cop, and by the end of the game, you're a juiced up super cop with some very generic but extremely fun abilities. You mix that in with a host of Batman-esque vehicles and you have a great game.
Number 10, Taskmaster versus Hyperion. This one is wild, especially when you consider the beating that Taskmaster was allowing himself to take just to get this fight done. And yet he did manage to get it done, and impressively so. We get to learn about how he actually had this one in the bag through flashbacks we are shown during the fight, where it's revealed that Taskmaster's preparation was the key. Now, it might seem weird that I'm considering Taskmaster to be the hero in this case, but based on what we learn about Phil Coulson's Squadron Supreme in the 2021 Heroes Reborn event, and that whole thing with Mephisto, it really does make sense based on that. In the Taskmaster series in issue number 2, Taskmaster is working with Nick Fury to clear his name, but Tony Masters has to do something for Fury first. He needs to collect the kinetic signatures of 3 important individuals, one of whom is Phil Coulson. But to get to him, he has to go through Hyperion. And in order to do that, he has to first bring Hyperion's guard down, in essence allowing Hyperion to punch his way through Taskmaster. Ouch. Taskmaster, through feigning a loss though, is able to get Hyperion to drop his guard enough to get a single, powerful boomerang arrow shot out. A Hawkeye classic that is tipped with Hyperion's one weakness based on Fury's intel: radioactive Argonite, which is basically like Hyperion's like kryptonite, so yeah. Alright friends, before we move on to this next spot on our list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button? I know there's a lot of you out there that aren't subscribed. I'm looking at you. You're not subscribed. Go click it. Do it. I'm gonna wait. Okay, thank you. Number 9, Dream vs. Karanzan. One of my favorite fights I've ever read in any book, comic, or otherwise happens in the Sandman series, where many of my favorite things happen in comics because it's one of my favorite stories of all time. If you've watched my videos on Nerd here regularly over the years, you may also know that this comic is one of my favorite stories of all time because anytime I can talk about it, I love to talk about it. The original comic, of course, from the 90s is what we're talking about here, and the fight that happens in it happens during the first arc in the series when Dream is tasked with reclaiming his symbols of office, namely here his helm, which it turns out is currently in the possession of a demon in hell. In order to get back his helm in the comics, he must do battle with and beat the demon currently in possession of it, one of Beelzebub's, a demon named Karanzan. This battle is described as being the oldest game and is in essence a battle of imagination. One can lose through hesitation, inability to take up a solid defensive stance, and of course, lack of imagination. In the Sandman live action series, this is the battle we see that takes place instead between Lucifer and Dream. However, in the comics, it is Karanzan that conjures up the anti-life in the hopes of finally beating Dream. While initially Dream is badly beaten by Karanzan's move, he ends up winning in the end, proving himself really the ruler of imagination, as what else are dreams really, by conjuring up the concept of hope, which obviously can beat pretty much everything. Some people might not consider Lord Morpheus a superhero, but I would consider his tale overall to be one similar to that of a heroic epic. And for that reason, and his capacity to do great good when he so chooses, I'm gonna include him here. Number 8, Moon Knight vs. Raoul Bushman. So many of the most brutal fights in comics I feel like come from the time period that this comic does, the early 2000s. one of the most edgy times other than the 90s. In Moon Knight issue number 2 from the 2006 volume, Moon Knight takes on and brutally defeats Raoul Bushman. But even before we get to the brutal yet victorious literal face-off moment, stakes are established here, with Moon Knight being pushed off of a rooftop and falling to his doom, or seemingly falling to his doom, smashing his knees as he goes, and therefore unable to get up to defend himself really when Bushman comes down to finish the job. Fortunately, Moon Knight has his crescent moon darts, and uses these to bring Bushman down to his level so he can crawl over to him and finish the job. Number 7. Black Panther vs. Namor. Probably one of the most brutal fights I've ever seen on screen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe comes to us from the recent Black Panther sequel, Wakanda Forever. That's right, we're going to the MCU, baby! In this film, it is T'Challa's sister Shuri who takes up the mantle of Black Panther after her brother passes away, which was changed in the script after the real-world death of Chadwick Boseman, who initially played Black Panther, Prince turned King T'Challa in the first film and in the MCU. Shuri here takes up the mantle as a last resort to reconnect with the family she has lost, but also because she knows it is the only way she will be able to fight against the newly introduced and complex antagonist in this movie, Namor, the Submariner, or Namor if you prefer. I love the way that it's said in this movie, Namor. When the two do come to blows after Shuri does successfully recreate the heart-shaped herb and becomes Black Panther, Shuri also uses her smarts to take advantage of Namor's weaknesses, creating a device to dry him out, which she places in one of her ships and activates during the fight against the famed Talokan. During the fight, the airship crash lands on a desert-looking beach. It looks real crispy down there, I gotta say. And the two continue their bloody fight, both almost dying as Shuri attempts to prevent Namor from getting back into the water. Through the course of their fight, Black Panther rips off one of Namor's ankle wings, which allows him to fly, and Namor at one point skewers her with a part of the wreckage. Or a spear, I'm not really sure what it is. Looks like a spear, but he also kind of grabbed it from where like the wreckage was. Maybe there were spears on the ship, who knows. Number 6. Thor vs. Kull Borson. Also known as the Serpent and the God of Fear, Kull Borson is actually Thor's uncle, but that didn't stop these two from fighting one another. In fact, their fight was in essence destined to happen. It had to happen, and Thor was fated to die in this battle against his uncle. Odin had attempted to keep Thor safe from this prophecy by locking Kull away years ago. Kull was once actually the rightful ruler of Asgard, the Allfather, but Odin was forced to overthrow his brother after Kull became obsessed with striking fear into both the hearts of his enemies and even kind of his allies. Odin locked Kull away deep beneath the sea, hoping to keep him from ever becoming powerful enough to rise again after he learned that the serpent was prophesied to kill his son. However, even doing this cannot prevent the prophecy from coming to pass. Eventually, Kull would rise up, powered by the fears of the people of Midgard, and choose his own champions, awarding them great power and each their own hammer. Thor would learn the truth of his uncle, and with the Avengers do battle against him and his army, dying as predicted in the fight against his uncle, but fortunately defeating him too. However, this is also comics, so both Kull and Thor would eventually return despite their epic showdown and its seemingly permanent results. Number 5. Harley Quinn vs. the Joker. While some still might think of Harley Quinn as a villain, this all happened, I would say, around the time of her turning point from kind of villain into hero. This is kind of when it's all going down. And while the road has been long, I would say at this point in time, at the time of this recording right now, despite only a few years before being declared Villain of the Year, that Harley is more hero than villain right now in her history. So yeah. This fight happened, however, quite a while ago now, but Harley was still enjoying acting somewhat heroically, at least as part of the Suicide Squad, and coming into her own really as a character, or continuing to come into her own, I would say. In Suicide Squad issue number 15, she faces off with the Joker in one of the most brutal fights I have ever read. And while the Joker technically kind of wins this fight, Harley wins the battle, managing to escape with her life after he locks her up and threatens to leave her there to starve to death with all the corpses of the supposed Harleys who came before her. There is so much about this fight that I cannot talk about in detail because we're on YouTube, but just trust me, it's just because it's also literally that brutal. So if you want to read a brutal fight, check it out. Number 4. Spider-Man vs. Green Goblin. This one ended in seeming death for both parties, and it doesn't get more brutal than that. Add in the fact that Peter Parker was also unmasked during the fight and had his loved ones and neighborhood watching him get basically beaten into oblivion, and it creates a pretty intense picture in your mind and in your heart. Or, well, yeah, I mean, you don't even really need to create a picture of it in your mind, because this comes from the Ultimate Comics, and of course they provide the pictures for you because it's a comic book. And what a brutal picture they do paint. This fight isn't just brutal in a physical sense, although it is also that, with Peter smashing a hulking Green Goblin with basically a semi-truck at one point, but it's also brutal in the emotional sense, because it ends with Peter's apparent death. And I mean also Goblin's apparent death. But of course, I'm much less broken up about Green Goblin dying here. No one cares. Norman, you deserved it. In fact, I kind of feel relieved at that part. While this wouldn't be the end for either character, this battle is still one that stands out to me as one with heightened stakes, where the characters feel right on the precipice of death almost throughout, until they actually and tragically cross over to the other side. Number 3. Batman vs. Superman. An iconic fight in the comics that made its way to the big screen. Granted, on the big screen, I don't know how iconic this fight was for me, but at the end of the day, the fact that it even made it there just goes to show the impact it had on readers. This fight doesn't even come from the main continuity, hailing instead from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns continuity of Earth 31. But it was so brutal and impactful that it was still incorporated into the main continuity, or the likely, I guess, to be former main continuity of the DCEU. Here, two heroes fight against one another, and one of them doesn't even have any powers to speak of. Batman at this point is not only still powerless, but is also, or I guess was also, retired. He returns from retirement, however, and as a result, Superman is basically tasked with taking him out by the President. But Batman isn't prepared to go down without a fight, and a bloody, brutal, and desperate battle ensues between the two at the end of the story that we later find out Batman seemingly won in his own sly Batman way. While Batman seemingly dies and is unable to finish the fight, with the strain being too much on his heart and him collapsing, we later learn at the funeral that he is still alive and well, and that Clark may have even been in on this ploy. At the very least, he seems to be in on it by the end of the story. Number 2. Hawkeye vs. the Liberators. As you'd expect, this list wouldn't be much without me diving into the world of the Ultimates. And what a perfect time for it too, as the Ultimate line is due to make its return in comics this year. There's so many brutal fights in the Ultimates, with Jonathan Hickman heading the return of the Ultimates line. Like many, I too am excited about this, so I thought why not dive back into some of the most brutal Ultimates fights we've ever witnessed. This one comes to us from before Jonathan Hickman's time working on the line, but was delivered to us by the dynamic and often brutal duo of Mark Miller and Brian Hitch. And Brian Hitch will be returning, so fun facts. It does fit right in on this list because it's just that brutal. The fight happened after Hawkeye of the Ultimates team was kidnapped by the Liberators. After learning of what happened to his family and being mocked, tormented, and questioned, Hawkeye finally manages to strike back against his captors with the only weapon he has at the time, his fingernails. And we're not talking about Clint clawing his way out of this. Oh no, we're talking about him using his fingernails as projectiles when combined with his deadly accuracy, which basically allow him to take out an entire group of Liberators and successfully escape. He kills people with his fingernails. Number 1. Mera vs. Aquaman. Mera and Aquaman are often presented as being romantic partners, and sometimes as a crime-fighting Atlantean duo as well. However, this doesn't mean that they never fight. And during the Blackest Night, they actually had some pretty good reason to. At that time, Aquaman had been possessed by the Black Lanterns, joining their forces, and Mera was driven into a rage by the death of the last standing family member she had, Tempest, causing her to become a Red Lantern. During one page in Green Lantern issue number 50 from the 2005 volume of that series, Mera takes on the deceased Arthur Curry, and when he attempts to win her over through what I can only describe as weird kind of empathy, I imagine trying to distract her from her rage by attempting to bond with her over the loss of their son. This, however, fails to work, and Mera frightens him off masterfully, responding "I never wanted children," before seemingly killing them both with her blood, which as a Red Lantern was transformed at the time into liquid napalm, because that's how it be for Red Lanterns. Number 10. Batman vs. Red Hood. During the story Under the Red Hood, Batman ends up face to face with Red Hood, aka Jason Todd. For years, Jason Todd was thought dead, but at this point it's been revealed that he is in fact alive, and has been for some time. Jason decides to return to Gotham and seek out Batman as the vigilante Red Hood. However, there is a great conflict between the two, with Batman fighting Red Hood during their first encounter and later condemning Jason for his brutal form of justice and his willingness to kill those who stand against him. When Batman attempts to persuade Jason to rejoin him, this has the opposite effect, only turning Jason more towards the darker path. Jason gives Batman an ultimatum: kill the Joker or kill him. You see, Jason wasn't mad that Batman wasn't able to save him years ago, or that he didn't come looking for him after his seeming death. He was mad that the Joker was still alive, with Batman allowing him to go on living, despite what he'd done. Batman refuses, however, to kill Jason or the Joker, instead preventing Jason from shooting the villain. As a result, Jason becomes an enemy of Batman, and a villain in general. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by hitting that subscribe button? Do it, I dare you. Number 9. Guardians of the Globe and Invincible vs. Machine Head, Hired Goons, and Battle Beast. This has to be one of the most brutal fights we've seen thus far in the animated series Invincible, though fans of the comics know that this really is just the beginning. Mark Grayson as Invincible hoped to help one of Machine Head's hired goons, Titan, escape his criminal life. However, in the end, he was betrayed by Titan, who only wanted to take his boss's title and position. And Invincible, as well as the Guardians of the Globe, also ended up getting their butts handed to them by Machine Head's hired muscle, Battle Beast, to boot. Which, I mean, fair enough. Battle Beast is nuts. Number 8. The Suicide Squad vs. Starro the Conqueror. Because, I mean, come on, you know I gotta do it. You know I gotta do it. Starro the Conqueror is one of the most destructive forces we've seen in the DCEU, and also maybe has one of the saddest stories besides in terms of his origins. That's right, for this one we are pivoting over to the DC Extended Universe, the name for their cinematic universe, and James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. Here, Starro the Conqueror is an alien life form that was basically kidnapped from outer space, brought to Earth, and experimented on by the Thinker. Over time, he has grown to be massive and, of course, quite angry at his captors. When the Suicide Squad are tasked with uncovering the secret of Project Starfish and destroying the base that houses it, they end up freeing Starro, causing mass destruction in Corto Maltese. They defeat Starro in the end, but some of them, of course, die along the way, and the amount of property damage and casualties as a result of this fight is pretty immense. Number 7. Wakanda vs. Namor the Submariner. This fight targeted the entire, often mostly heroic nation of Wakanda, and what's more, it was another supposed hero, or at least anti-hero, doing the damage. This all went down during the Avengers vs. X-Men event, with the Avengers said to have taken up refuge in Wakanda, and Namor being possessed by a piece of the Phoenix Force belonging at the time to the Phoenix Five. He decided to use his power to draw them out. How did he do this? Well, with a tidal wave that destroyed much of Wakanda, killed or hurt many of its people, and ended up causing a split between everyone's favorite couple, T'Challa's Black Panther and Aurora Monroe's Storm. Thanks for that, Namor. Namor! Number 6. Great Ring of Arakko vs. Uranos. This one was pretty brutal for Arakko, and it was a surprisingly quick fight. This all went down during the event Avengers vs. X-Men vs. Eternals Judgment Day, or AXE for short. With the revelation to the world that the mutants were capable of resurrection, new Prime Eternal Druig realized he could use this information to his advantage, and to strengthen his rule. He decided to label the mutants as deviants, seeing their ability to control life and death as excess deviation. Labeling it as such, he went to war with them, and was even convinced to release eternal criminal Uranos. Uranos is known for being one of the most effective warlords around, removing any and all who basically stand in his path, and eradicating them and whatever race they belong to or world they belong to completely. When Druig unleashes Uranos on Mars, now known as Planet Arakko, the ruling government known as the Great Ring does not stand a chance against them. I feel like within the first 5 or 10 minutes of that fight, they're pretty much defeated as well, which is pretty crazy because they're like all Omega level mutants. Number 5. Marvel Universe vs. the Progenitor. This one was quite the doozy. Remember how we were talking about AXE? Well, doesn't end with Druig unleashing Uranos. Although Uranos plays a key role and is a massive threat in this story, he isn't even the main antagonist here. That role is actually taken by the Progenitor. The Progenitor is the Rebel Eternals' response to Druig's reign and his attack on mutants. They decide the best way to stop him is to resurrect a Celestial, creating their own version of one of the cosmic gods. gods, and giving it a moral system which would actually help the Celestial to see their side of the argument, thereby defeating and deposing Druig. This, however, does not work out as planned. With the help of the Avengers and mutant geneticist Mr. Sinister, the Eternals create their god, but it turns out that the progenitor is less interested in judging solely Druig and more interested in judging all of Earth. And if found lacking, the progenitor promises that within 24 hours, Earth will be destroyed as a result. And after the 24 hours are up, and it does indeed judge Earth to be unworthy, it begins to deliver on its promise, killing many of Marvel's most prominent and most powerful heroes. Number 4. Superman vs. the Joker and Harley Quinn. This one definitely ended in major disaster, as it was the event that ended up resulting in the Injustice timeline here. And we all know how that ended up. Awfully. This was a really one-sided fight too, as Superman didn't really stand a chance against the Joker and Harley Quinn's machinations. Which sounds weird to say considering it's Superman, but that's what happened. In this world, they manipulated Superman into thinking that he was fighting Doomsday, when in reality he was actually fighting Lois Lane, you know, his one true love. Discovering only too late what he'd really done, the realization of what they made him do basically broke Superman. He would end up killing the Joker in cold blood and turning into a tyrant as a result of this targeted and grossly successful attack on Supes and his family. Number 3. Marvel Universe vs. Onslaught. When Marvel's heroes came up against Onslaught, it took all of them banding together, even joined by some villains, to stand a chance against him. And even then, this seemingly was not enough, with many heroes sacrificing themselves in order to defeat Onslaught for good. At first, we were made to believe that these heroes were dead, gone for good. That's how deadly the threat of Onslaught was. People were willing to lay their lives on the line. Fortunately, that's not exactly what happened, and instead, Franklin Richards, the child of Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, and Susan Storm Richards, aka Invisible Woman of the Fantastic Four, was able to save the day. Despite his youth, Franklin at the time had immensely powerful reality warping powers, and used them without really even being super aware of it, kind of subconsciously, to safely stow Earth's heroes away in a pocket dimension. Onslaught would be defeated, the heroes saved, and shortly after they would make their return to the main reality of Earth 616. But still, we thought they were all dead, so it was a pretty big cost, it seemed at the time. Number 2. Captain America vs. Iron Man. When these two fought just as the 2015 Secret Wars event was starting up in Avengers issue number 44 during Time Runs Out, it was literally a fight that ended with the destruction of the multiverse. I don't know how much more disastrous that can get. While Captain America and Iron Man weren't the ones behind the destruction of the multiverse, they also weren't doing much to help prevent it at this point either. This fight had been a long time coming at this point, considering all the pent-up frustration and tension that had been growing between these two over the years, especially after the events of Civil War. The thing is, there will always be room in the comics for a fight between Cap and Tony, because, well, they're both so different in terms of their ideologies. Unless I guess we are in the reality of Earth 3490, where Steve Rogers and a female version of Tony named Natasha Stark are actually married. Although, I'm sure even those two fight, right? Marital fights. Number 1. DC Universe vs. Perpetua. Perpetua is one of the greatest threats the multiverse has ever faced when it comes to DC Comics. And when our famed heroes first faced her, guess what? They lost. I know, it's shocking. That doesn't usually happen in comics. Perpetua's goal was to reshape the multiverse in her own darker image. After she broke free from the Source Wall, she set out to do just this, with the help of her allies Batman Who Laughs and Barbados. In the end, Perpetua would be defeated, even being betrayed by one of her own, with Batman Who Laughs usurping her and taking her power for himself. But still, the temporary threat of a new world where Perpetua ruled was pretty awful. And for a while, she kinda did win, so yeah. Number 10. Invincible vs. Conquest. Goodness. Invincible has a slew of fights that are extremely brutal and brilliant. I mean, their brutality is a huge part of what makes them so brilliant. This is a series that knows and understands the importance of creating stakes, both physical and emotional ones, for its characters. While I considered talking about the fight between Mark and his dad Omni-Man on the first part of this list, or honestly any of the other amazing fights that happen in Invincible to be honest, as I said there are so many, I would like to specifically thank Vaughn Soso for suggesting this one. This is the fight that happens between Conquest and Invincible. When Conquest first arrives on Earth and demands that Invincible take responsibility as the Viltrumite liaison stationed there to basically get the planet ready for conquering. Mark at this point has just gone through hell and back and basically blames himself for all of the terrible things that have happened on Earth recently. So he's not really in a great mood and is filled with anger, resentment, and sadness for all that he's lost, and decides to take on Conquest. Overall, honestly, not a great move, which Mark learns once he finds out just how powerful Conquest is. Probably one of the toughest enemies he's ever faced at this point, which is kind of par for the course for Invincible, because I feel like every time Mark faces someone, he's like, well, I've done a lot of things, and then he's always like, dang, how is this person even more powerful? How is that possible? Honestly, it's saying something, because at this point in the story, Mark has faced like a lot of tough opponents, including a whole army made up of evil versions of himself. The fight gets even more brutal when Adam Eve comes in to help, having literally flown up off a hospital bed where she was currently healing herself to do so. And I know what you all are thinking, wow, Amanda, what a number 10 spot. This is a crazy fight. But yeah, that's all part of the drawing you in, because we got a lot more crazy fights coming up, even though this one might actually be one of our craziest. But wait for that number 1 spot, that one's wild. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us by clicking that like button. Number 9, Deadpool versus Black Box and Black Tom. I still can't believe how close Deadpool came to dying in this fight, and the real crazy part is it wasn't even the villains really who put him in that situation. They were more like the catalysts for him putting himself in danger as he fought against them both. This one comes to us from Daniel Way's run on Deadpool, which happened back in 2008. Here at one point, Deadpool becomes cured of his mutation. With his healing factor gone, he is turned back into handsome Wade Wilson, but at the same time, a big target is of course placed on his head when those he has royally pissed off in the past basically realize he's now very killable. Two people who end up coming for him are the villains Black Box and Black Tom, and to fight their fire, Deadpool decides to use some of his own fire, using literal fire, using a lighter and basically gasoline to create his own flamethrower. However, while he wins the fight, or while he survives the fight at least, I mean, I would call it a win for Deadpool here, he ends up pretty badly injured after setting himself on fire during it. He gets a little too excited with that sort of gas station flamethrower he made, and also, you shouldn't do that at a gas station, as we learn in that comic. Number 8, Superboy Prime versus The Darkest Knight. This one is brutal in a way that pulls at my heartstrings. This fight happens in the comic Dark Knight's Death Metal: The Secret Origins. While the fight itself is pretty short, the emotional and character building implications for it are powerful. The emotional stakes here are high. Superboy Prime ends up facing off against the Darkest Knight in the hopes of defeating him and helping to basically save the multiverse. Now, while he doesn't completely succeed here, he does help turn the tides for his fellow heroes, and this story provides a great redemption arc for Superboy Prime, who was once a hero, basically turned into a massive villain, all because he suffered the heartache of losing his world. While facing off against the Darkest Knight, Superboy Prime is basically offered to be spared and even join up with the Knight's own army of Supermen. He sees a vision of a life he could have in the future where he is once more a hero, fighting alongside his other heroic colleagues if he decides to, join up with the Darkest Knight, who can give him that reality. However, he acknowledges that this would still not be the world he lost, noting that both his parents and Lori would still be absent here. Tempted, Superboy is grounded in reality suddenly by the reappearance of Crypto, and ends up refusing the offer, fighting against the Darkest Knight and giving his life in doing so. While the battle is not finished yet, this is a crucial moment where the tides turn for our heroes, weakening the darkness and allowing the heroes to basically rise up and end up winning the day. It is then confirmed that Superboy Prime did indeed die as a result of fighting back. However, he either gets his world back through his journey into the afterlife, or possibly through the multiverse's reconstruction following the resolution of death metal. So he's either dead and then he's brought back, or he's dead and he's in the afterlife and he just kind of gets a little happy ending in the afterlife. Number 7, Dazzler versus Techmaster. One of the most brutal things you can do to a character, we all know, is not to just throw them brutally across a room into a wall, but literally throw them so forcefully that it looks like they were simply drawn sideways in a fight. Like someone took that figure and rotated it, which is what happens in this comic. And I was like, wow, that's bad. Look at Dazzler go, she's literally like this. That's what happened to Dazzler when she faced off against Techmaster. Well, Techmaster is very much, I would say, a lesser known villain, having only appeared in about a handful of issues during his time in the comics. This fight still personally had me on the edge of my seat. Honestly, a lot of classic stories have me on the edge of my seat. I just feel like the suspense just feels so heightened. While Dazzler usually pulls out all her bells and whistles in a fight, in this one she has her special portable radio made by Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four, destroyed, and ultimately it comes down to basically kind of like fisticuffs, as Dazzler fights desperately for survival here. She does win and even almost causes causes the death of her opponent as he tumbles backwards and falls over a railing. However, her manager, Harry Osgood, manages to rush in at the last minute and save the villain from certain doom, and with his life saved, Techmaster basically decides to make peace with both his rival Harry and with Harry's talent, Alison Blair. So, all kind of works out in the end. Number 6. Batman vs. Reverse Flash. This fight was heart-wrenching for so many reasons, and pretty much perfectly encapsulates the kind of fights I'm excited to highlight here on this list, let me tell you. In Batman issue number 21 from the 2016 comic, part of the Button story, Batman is forced to fight against an enemy who pretty much completely outranks him, the Reverse Flash. We see him get brutally attacked, and while it seems like there is no way Batman can win here, we later learn that being the smart man that he is, Batman himself knew that, and so he'd kind of already won, simply by accepting the fact that if he fought directly, he would lose, and knowing that his best bet would actually be basically to stall until the Flash returned, which ended up being a successful and life-saving strategy actually. Although I mean, in the end the Flash was still a little late, but it worked out, so yeah. And it was brutal, so it ranks. Number 5. Punisher vs. Wolverine. I mean, these two are both superheroes, which is maybe what makes the fight so much more brutal. This one happened during Garth Ennis's and Derek Robertson's time on Punisher. Here, Punisher and Wolverine end up in a kind of a reluctant team-up, or a team-up gone wrong, I would say, when Wolverine questions Punisher's methods here. As a result, to prevent Wolverine from hunting him down, or at least to kind of like slow Wolverine down because, you know, he's pretty unkillable, Punisher resorts to all kinds of brutal tactics, including shooting Wolverine point blank in the face with a shotgun, allowing him to have his limbs basically sawed off, attacking him below the belt, and steamrolling him. Literally, he got steamrolled. He got a steamroller and he ran Wolverine over. Boy. Wolverine of course survives all this mistreatment, but it's still a brutal read, and it's brutal in like a lot of ways to me. Definitely a brutal fight. Number 4. Batman vs. the Joker. During the events of Endgame, no, not the Marvel Endgame, the comic story from Batman Endgame, Joker and Batman essentially end up trying to straight up murder one another, or at least from a reader standpoint, that's basically what it seems like. Well, Joker at this point boasts of a healing factor that he claims he received hundreds of years before due to him being like basically this ancient being, far more ancient than Batman could have ever imagined. It's revealed through the course of their fight that, you know, this is probably not true, as Batman ends up successfully nullifying Joker's abilities in a way that reveals he only recently probably stumbled upon these powers and is definitely not as old as he claims and is just trying to mess with Batman, which honestly is the Joker way. Number 3. Conan vs. Cool and Goth. Just when you think Conan is going to take this one, the script gets flipped on you. This fight comes to us from Savage Avengers issue number 25, so good. Here, Cool and Goth faces off against Conan, who has come back to battle this fiend with the help of Kang. So you would think, with the impressive arsenal Kang has at his fingertips, that Conan would have this, right? Well, this is Cool and Goth, probably at his most powerful. He is the ruler of the world here, and even though Conan manages to maim him, he's not able to defeat him in hand-to-sorcery combat in this issue. Though of course there is a greater plan at work here, which ends up balancing the scales in Conan's favor in the end, but during this issue we don't really get to see that. Instead we focus on this bloody and gruesome battle fought with magic, energy weapons, armor, swords, symbiotes, and sharp fingernails. Deadly sharp, if I may add. Number 2. Superman vs. Doomsday. Superman and Doomsday have an iconic fight that many of us know from the famous story Death of Superman. Now, if you've already watched my part 1 to this list, then this fight actually might remind you of another one I talked about over there. And if you haven't watched part 1 yet, be sure to do that after you finish this video, because we have even more brutal superhero fights waiting for you over there. And if you have already watched it, you can guess below which fight I'm referring to as to which one is kind of similar to this Superman vs. Doomsday fight. In this fight, Superman gives up his life to basically defeat Doomsday. This works with Doomsday perishing alongside Superman, ushering in the mourning period that would follow for Earth's greatest hero. But while there were those who could not believe what they were reading at the time that this story came out, this shocking moment at least would not end up being quite so frighteningly permanent, with Clark Kent later being resurrected. Even when you go back and read this, it's very powerful, it's very emotional. Number 1. Miracle Man vs. Kid Miracle Man. Whew! This is a brutal one. Thanks to Michael Lavender for suggesting this one in the comments. I honestly do not think of Miracle Man often enough in my day-to-day. When I'm talking about comics, the Miracle Man is something that exists sort of near the back of my mind. So thank you so much for suggesting this one, because now I get to talk about Miracle Man, which is just a great time. Talk about a character and a story and a fight. Rather, this one is honestly more of a her by the end. Less of a fight, more of just a brutal It's true that this is probably one of the most brutal superhero fights in all of comics history, I would say. And I'm actually sad that I didn't include this on my part 1, but you know what? It doesn't have to be the most brutal, it just had to be some brutal fights. So it's still good. Now we can come back to it over here and I can give it a top spot. We're going back to issue number 15 of Miracle Man to talk about this one from the 80s, although it was also reprinted in 2014, so if you see it looking a little bit more modern here, it might just be because we used that art in this video instead, which is actually also from Toddleben, so it's same artist, just they also redid it. And I would still say that I think this story has some of the most captivating and gruesome artwork I've ever seen in a comic, courtesy of Toddleben himself. In this tragic tale, Miracle Man is forced to fight against his former sidekick, Kid Miracle Man, who is now all grown up. Well, at least his Kid Miracle Man form is. Having lived in this form for years, he aged and also became insane. After transforming back into his human form of Johnny Bates initially after years of being Kid Miracle Man, who was now an adult and was basically crazed with power, he was traumatized to learn of all the horrible things that he had done in that form. So he was put into an orphanage with the hopes that, being around other kids his age might help him to drown out the voice of Kid Miracle Man that still plagued his mind and was kind of living in there. However, after being tormented by the other kids and suffering from SA, Johnny ended up saying the magical name of Miracle Man, transforming back into Kid Miracle Man and unleashing him on the world. Thousands, 40,000 people were killed in the massacre that ensued after this transformation, and in the end, Miracle Man got lucky when Kid Miracle Man was forced to say the magical word once more to escape the pain of the injuries he'd suffered in battle. Also, this battle, I should admit, took pretty much everyone to even just get him to turn back, so that's wild. Knowing that there was likely no way to save Johnny from his evil alter ego, and therefore no way to prevent this kind of awful massacre from happening again, potentially in the future, Miracle Man was then forced to offer Johnny a sense of comfort, holding Johnny's head before he basically crushes it in his hand. I have trauma just from reliving the story and rereading it.